Welcome to the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. Join us here every Saturday night at 8 o'clock, or listen to our podcast anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, just to name a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore, where independent new authors come first. Max Goelling is a very busy guy, but found the time to write, sorry lady, but it's the Framus or Framus. We'll find out. A Busy Woman's Guide to Winning the Auto Repair Game. And talk about busy.
I do a lot of things for a 64-year-old man.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm a lifeguard at the Y. I have a wedding ministry, so I perform weddings.
Yeah.
And I teach emergency medicine.
That's great. Were you a doctor in a previous life?
No, PA, trauma PA, yeah.
So that's a physician's assistant?
It is in the emergency department,
When did you start writing?
When did I start writing? I think I published in 2012. It was about a 2.5-year project, so let's call it 2010.
Really? You were doing all these other things and one day said, I'm going to write.
I was what was called a geographic bachelor. My wife and I had moved around. I was in the military, active duty. And once I got promoted to sergeant major, my crowd at the Pentagon moved me around probably once every year. And my wife, being the gardener and home person that she is, just kind of got tired of that. So we ended up buying a house in North Carolina, and she lived there and I lived wherever the heck I was. So a lot of free time.
Oh.
And, you know, it wasn't that I got out a whole lot, but there were occasions where, you know, I would be somewhere, whether it was the auto parts store or heck in some bar somewhere, I don't know, and observe women getting treated poorly when it came to cars. And that just, I don't know, after a while, it just got to me and I thought, well, you know, I got all this free time. Is there something I can do about this? And so I said, well, you know, I grew up poor. I know how to fix cars. You know, I taught my kids what to do. So, yeah, I just kind of sat down and started writing. I mean, it started very slowly.
Well, this started over 10 years ago?
Absolutely. That's correct.
This book?
Yes. I went through the self-publishing route.
Oh.
And, you know, I'm kind of a hopeless academic. That's what my wife called me, because I've got, you know, so many darn degrees. It's not even funny. So, you know, I was very used to the idea of researching a project, putting the ideas down, etc. And I thought, well, you know, this is an opportunity to learn something new. Let's publish this book by myself. So I learned everything about editing and proofreading and graphic layout and cover design and printing, and did it all by myself and published it in 2012. Barcode and everything.
And?
I sold exactly as many books as the marketing effort that I put into it, which was like 6.
So you didn't put much marketing effort into it?
I sure didn't, because I was still on active duty. I was the CFO of a nonprofit, and I don't know. For one thing, I didn't know what I was doing. Let's go with that. That would be one time, or one of the few times in my life that I can comfortably say I did not know what to do next. I had like 500 books printed. I started giving them away. So the woman in the parking lot whose car wouldn't start, and I helped clean her battery terminals and give her a jump. Here's a book. You know, woman on the side of the road. Here's a book. You know, I just started giving them away. So then I don't even know what happened. I got an email or talked to somebody at Fulton, and, you know, they said, hey, we can do this professionally. Send us your manuscript and we'll see if it works for us. So that's kind of where the professional side started.
So they republished your book.
They did.
And,
you know, it looks great. It's a lot different than the one I did, but it still looks great. We made a lot of changes, you know, as they went through it. It is not a maintenance manual, nor is it a repair manual. This is a book that provides women with the information they need to ask the right questions. Because it's my opinion, mine may be alone, but others have certainly validated this, that the big reason why the price tag is different for you and me when we have the same problem on the same car is because you're a woman. I don't agree with that entirely. I think it's because the mechanic, and this isn't all mechanics, and I say this in the book, I am not trashing mechanics. Really, I'm not. I've known some great mechanics. Love them to death, but, there's always that but. I think that if the woman does not appear to know what's going on, the probability of her bill being higher is significantly larger. So by this, I mean, if she can say, hey, man, you're replacing my spark plugs. Can I see it when you're done? Can I see the old one? Or what do you mean that it's leaking? What is it leaking? Where is it leaking from? Do you have any idea why it's leaking? Those kind of questions, I think, change the dynamic between a woman and a mechanic. And that's what the book is about. It's knowing just enough about how the car works to ask the best questions.
You don't think that's true? Like if a guy comes in who doesn't seem to know a darn thing about cars, you don't think that a mechanic is just as likely to take advantage of him?
No.
Really? You really?
I think
is it 2024? Let me check my calendar.
Yeah.
Are you
check
kidding
your
me?
Calendar.
Are you kidding me?
I wish that were true. Now, hold on. That is not to say a guy that doesn't know much about cars walks in. I still maintain that the probability is higher if it's a woman. Now, okay, shoot me. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
No, I wish you were wrong.
I wish I was wrong.
I wish listen, you know what? I work in an industry where I could do the same job on the street as a reporter as another guy, and the other guy's going to get paid more. Equal pay, equal job. Like that is still a freaking issue today. What the heck?
Of course it is.
Right.
However, it really looks like the last ceiling might be broken. I really do.
We won't go there. That's your next book.
Yeah, there's the question.
So
there's
wait a minute.
The question.
So Max, you've written one book.
Yeah, I know. That's pretty sad, isn't it? Stephen King, watch out.
So are there more? What else? What's next?
Yeah, that's a great question. And do I have that kind of time and mental energy to do another book? That's a really good question. I tend to get my fingers into a lot of different things, and so I just don't know. But several women have asked me, well, why don't you do a maintenance book, a book about how do we keep this machine running? I just put on the website 3 days ago about used car sales, and how many used cars are being sold versus new cars. Right. And it's a big number. It's like 34 million. So, do women and or young men or men in general need a book to tell them how to clean battery terminals so they don't end up in that parking lot, without the engine running? I don't know. That's a thought. I mean, that would be a consistent theme, because I just do not believe I'm ready to write fiction. I can tell you that right now. I read a lot. I read every single day, probably an hour plus. I know what good fiction looks like, and that ain't me.
Okay. All right.
I say this in the answer to that more directly. Let me see if I can sell the first one.
Okay. And sorry, lady, but it's the Framus?
Everybody asks that question too. I answer it in the beginning of the book.
Framus?
Framus. So 100 years ago, my dad married this new woman, and she had a lot of record albums, and I was all of 7 or 8 years old at the time. And this was back where we could still talk about Bill Cosby.
Yes.
And one of his records, he talked about being at the dentist.
Oh.
I don't know if you remember the story, but the point is, like we always say, the dentist always asks you questions when you can't answer them, when your mouth is full of Novocaine. And he was trying to tell the dentist that his face was melting or that his face was falling off. And he says, my Framus. And that's all he could pronounce, right? Well, I remember that story, and I thought about how often, and I hope it's not very often, but it might be, that a mechanic will describe something to a woman, in this case, that really doesn't exist.
Oh, okay.
You know, it's a part that he knows the real name of, or maybe he's clueless
Right.
and he's just making something up. And so he just uses a word that he knows she's not going to understand. And that's what the Framis
That
is.
is so disturbing to me on
It
so
is.
many
I
levels.
know.
Yeah.
I know. See, this is a disturbing book. I'm
It's very
telling
disturbing. Yes.
you.
Okay.
I know. But maybe that makes it more marketable. I don't have a clue.
I don't know. We'll find out.
Yeah, you're darn
All
right. I
right.
have to get my butt out
All
there.
right. You take care, Max. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Alice.
Bye-bye. A retired New York City elementary school teacher, Carol Ann, used the arts in her teaching, and now she uses nature as inspiration for her books, including her second one for Paige entitled My Gift to You. Now, you're an artist, you're a writer, you're a musician, and you really found inspiration in your teaching, didn't you?
What I did was I used the music as a tool for teaching reading and language arts because I saw that was the need in that particular area. So I developed a curriculum and it was very good. It was successful. And then I started teaching that to adults. I was doing some staff development on that. Teaching reading through music, that's what I called my curriculum.
That's excellent. Are you a musician as well?
Yes, I'm a trained classical violinist. I do play some guitar. I do play a little bit of here and there. I play the piano. I had to play the piano in the school and, for all the assemblies and big events. So it was very challenging, hard work, but very rewarding.
When did you start writing?
This is an interesting story. I'm a dialysis patient, so I became somewhat disabled, you could say. And this was 2 years ago. I said, I have to find another purpose to keep me occupied, to keep me busy. And I want also children to learn. I want to keep teaching. So I said, let me start writing something about nature. And I got connected with Page Publishing and I wrote my first book. It was published about 2 years ago. So I'm a late bloomer when it comes to the writing, but apparently they discovered a talent that I didn't know I even had.
What was the book you published 2 years ago?
It was called The Breath of Life Trees. And I wrote a story about the importance of trees in the environment.
Do you ever get to read your books to any kids? I mean, I take it these are children's books.
Yes, they are for elementary school children. Well, as a dialysis patient, I also got involved with a dog therapy program. Everything just happened. Nothing was ever planned. And I think that's the best way to do stuff. And this gentleman who trains, and he's the owner of the dog, asked me if I would go to the various libraries to read to the children. So he started taking me on tour to the various libraries in my area. And that's how that started.
That's talk about, something that you'd think would just destroy you, turning into something so positive.
Yes. And
you just never know, do you?
You don't. And I try to keep it positive. I like to inspire people through my books. And also I do go around without the books and I help the other patients as best I can.
Are you still doing dialysis?
Oh yes, this is a lifelong treatment until they find a cure for all of these so-called kidney diseases.
Oh my gosh, but you just keep going.
Yes, and it's 3 times a week, about 4 hours each time, and that doesn't include the transportation to and from. And it's very challenging and it's difficult. It's very difficult. So you have to find something beautiful and positive to overcome this. And I found it apparently in writing the books. And I also started a newsletter, a newspaper at my treatment center. So I'm the editor and contributing writer for that. I volunteered to do it.
That's great. So when people come for dialysis, they have something to read.
Yes. And I keep busy with my little dog. I have a beautiful little Maltipoo. And a few weeks ago, I got myself a little hamster, and he's going to be the subject of another book. Do you know what his name is?
What's his name?
You'll never guess what his name is.
Okay.
I call him El Señor Pepe Gonzalez.
You're funny. So tell me about this book, My Gift to You.
My gift to you is a book about different aspects of nature, the bees, the birds, the deer, and the gifts that they give to us, what they offer all human beings. For example, the bird will give a tweet of love that you have never heard. The bee gives us the pollen from the tree, and each one gives us something wonderful in nature and also in food products, because all that pollen, will eventually create something wonderful to eat. But unfortunately, with climate change, a lot of these animals and insects are disappearing. I noticed that around here too. And the illustrations came out so beautiful. Of course, they've been revised many times by me because I want it to be perfect. I want it to be beautiful and educational at the same time. And I happen to like the second book better, I'll be honest about it. I think the illustrations came out more colorful, and I think there's more text to it. So I really like the second one. I like both, but I prefer the second one. Yeah.
Any advice for people listening who want to write a book but can't seem to get going?
Yes, I would suggest, and I do suggest it to my friends and family who really would like to write, but somehow it's very intimidating. They're actually afraid to begin. And I said, you know what? Well, all beginnings are hard. We know that. But to start writing, I tell them, say something. Say something that you ordinarily say every day of your life and write it down. Just keep writing what you say. And all of a sudden, you will take off and it will happen. You have to start somewhere. If you don't have a subject, say something like good morning to somebody, or when you have a conversation, recall that conversation and write it down and write exactly what you say. If you have a journal, a lot of people keep journals. If you, for example, you read something interesting, and if you speak it, you can write it. And I think that's a good beginning. And then you can take off into any area that you choose.
Great, Carol Ann. Great advice. Thank you so much.
Well, you're very welcome.
Efiong Aniatang has a very interesting background. He waited 3 years for a U.S. visa before he left Nigeria after high school in 1971. He became an accountant, earned an MBA in finance and banking, and a PhD in public policy and administration before he returned to Nigeria in 1979 to work in public funding. But politics, corruption, and tribalism in the African nation forced his return to the U.S., where he spent a number of years writing his book, Considered Guilty: How Republicans Tried to Stifle the Obama Presidency, and a review of conceptualized U.S. tax cuts. Now, you were very disturbed by the way President Obama was treated while he was in office.
Yeah, okay, because of all the problems that he was facing from Republicans, particularly Mitch McConnell.
Yeah.
You remember he said Obama should be only a one-term president. And I couldn't understand why. Has he ever spoken that or said something like that to a white president of the United States? because of Obama's skin color. So he thought he could just play with him and insult him and say all amount of things to him. But Obama was able to win re-election in 2012 and serve for 8 years.
Yep.
And then I brought in, of course, some other areas, the way the country began and the politics of the country, the politics of the Republican Party. I wanted the readers, to understand what really were going around. Then, of course, you also remember the issue of healthcare crisis, which they used about 60 times to frustrate the establishment of healthcare, as if the healthcare was for foreigners. The healthcare was for Americans. So I don't know why they fought so many years to stop it. Then I moved to the issue of the French diplomat Jacobin, who wrote a beautiful proposition about American democracy that he thought America would not succeed with the democratic procedure that was already being laid down in the country because he was a French aristocrat. And he came down here to the country and stayed for some years, having 2 or 3 years to study the policies and the Senate, the House of Representatives, the governors, because he wanted to see if they could work. And in the end, he realized that the system could really work if managed properly. So I included that in the book also. And of course, I also included a few pages about my country, Nigeria, which I wasn't impressed about because they have been having tribal conflicts and war, killing people, killing women. So I included that as well.
You cover a lot.
Yes, I did.
You defend President Obama.
Right, I did.
And all of the attacks against him.
Exactly.
And then illustrate how a Frenchman came here to learn about our government and decided it was the way to go.
Right.
And then you talk about Nigeria. Do you tie it all together?
I tie them all together because certain things which were happening in Nigeria also could have happened if we were in this country. In fact, in several years ago, should I say decades and probably centuries ago, there was a very effective Roman emperor and Roman government. Then they conspired against Julius Caesar, stabbed him to death, and the ancient Rome, as powerful as it was, degenerated into confusion and wars. And that wasn't caused by foreigners; it was all caused by the Romans. And if care is not taken, it could happen in this country.
That has been said. We are Rome. We could fall.
Exactly.
Do you talk about what you're most concerned about right now?
In fact, I'm writing a new book now about what I'm most concerned about.
Okay.
Right, and that is based on the ethical concerns of what is happening in the United States. Because there are certain people who are mainly politicians who do not want to speak truthfully to the United States of America. Yeah. They prefer to rely on their political behaviors and senses. And they are mostly in the Republican Party, headed by Donald Trump. If government is not in their favor, they fight it to death. If they are not in power, they don't agree with anything that government does. Okay, so that's my next book.
All right. So what is your hope for this book?
My hope is to enlighten Americans. We have short memories here. Is to really inform Americans the way this country has come up and how useful the country has been. And because I wasn't born here, I may have a different perspective of how America is. And maybe I regard it as a very beautiful place to stay and work. And Americans should not throw it into down the stream. People should respect the country, should speak truthfully to it, and should respect the laws of the country.
Who do you think is your audience?
I think my audience are the reading public, particularly those who are students in the universities, because it's meant for that level
Right.
and who have studied public policy in the country and are educated and can understand simple, logical, comparison or comparative analysis. That is the sort of class of Americans that I think when they read the book, they will appreciate it.
Well, you've certainly given us plenty to think about.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Caught up with Larry Moskau in Brazil, where we talked writing, AI, Bitcoin, and digging for the truth behind religion, the zodiac, astrology, and mythology to write his book entitled Snake Oil. How long have you been writing?
I started, I'm going to say, about 5 years ago. I self-published a book called I Believe. And then my motivation for snake oil was from the Egyptian information that I began to research. I was motivated by the Egyptian mythology. And it occurred to me that there were so many things that were presented to us as factual that were not actually factual.
For instance?
Okay, the house of Aries and the house of Pisces are two historical astrological facts. In 2,000 years ago, they changed. It changed from Aries to Pisces. There is no record of that in anywhere that I've looked or tried to find a celebration of that issue. And it's not on the record, but it happened, right? This is an astrological fact. We know that there is a zodiac. There are 12 signs, 12 symbols that represent the months of the year and also represent the houses of the precession of the equinoxes. These are all, scientific facts. The NASA has proven all of these things. This is not anything I made up, but it's factual, okay? But it's not in the written records. So we have records that were given to us by the powers that had control of this. And naturally, if they were writing an autobiography, they would not give us any of the bad information about what they did, right?
Right.
They were only going to give us the bright and shining knight in his armor. So that's what we got, and that's what prompted me to do the book, which is about the development of an AI system so that the truth can be brought forward.
How do you tell this story?
It became an idea of how would someone develop a system like Bitcoin, an AI system that had the same characteristics as that type of system of Bitcoin, where it's only accessible through certain means. And the main guy, the main character in this story is an Indian whose family was involved in the code writing for the United States during World War II, where the Germans couldn't identify what the Americans were saying or the Allies were saying because it was in an Indian code. So they didn't know the language, and naturally they were able to do things that could not be understood by the enemy. But anyway, he's the main character. And he travels all around the world to gather information that he can put into the AI. The character Amos is the very wealthy individual who's putting together this AI system, the blockchain system like they use for Bitcoin. And only certain people can enter into the system. There's 6 of them that are around the world that are able to enter information into the system. And it involves some people from Greece, from Egypt, from Hollywood. There's a whole mixture of people involved in this that's putting it together. And it's an interesting story from my standpoint, and I don't know how other people are going to digest it. The people that have read it have told me it's a good story. So,
what's the lesson here?
That the reason the zodiac was developed, the bottom line is that it's for telling time. All of the cosmos, all of the constellations that are labeled and named are done so for a reason. And the zodiac was put together so that we understand the seasons of the year. And I don't know if you know, there are two zodiac systems. One is called sidereal and the other is tropical. The Western world uses the tropical system so that Aries is always March the 21st, which that's the beginning of spring. But in essence, it's not Aries. This era or eon, we're actually in the house of Pisces, not Aries. That's the sidereal, the real one. We're in Pisces.
Okay.
The idea of the snake oil is that there is no power delivered from the cosmos to Earth. This is all fictitious, made up baloney that any of the stars or the houses that we're born in, that any of that has any influence on us being sane or crazy. We're born and we're influenced by our environment and where we're born in a place in the world rather than from the stars. There's no snake oil in the stories. You are familiar with the snake oil story, right? Where the guy was fined for saying that he had snake oil in his liniment and there was none there. So that's the idea. It's being proclaimed something and there's nothing there.
It's all smoke and mirrors.
Exactly. It's corrupt BS.
Right.
It's for the imagination only.
Right.
It's the same thing as religious beliefs. There's certain things about religions that we cannot prove. We cannot prove you have a soul. Cannot prove there's an afterlife, there's a heaven or a hell or a devil or an angel. None of these things have ever existed in proof. They're for the imagination and were developed by magicians.
Okay, some people aren't going to like that, but what the heck?
I'm hoping it's controversial, yes. We don't want mainstream agreeing with everything, right? We have to have somebody swimming against the current.
That's right.
So somebody has to be the villain.
That's right.
So that's what the book is about. And the character's name is Blue White. He has two color names, Blue White. He's the Indian.
Okay. And you didn't really write before you retired?
Not really. And I guess one of the principles behind it is the books that I've read. I've read probably 500 books, and I'm still reading. I'm reading right now Mythos and the Cosmos. It's an insatiable appetite for information that exists and coexists, and it doesn't always match up. Some of it does, but some of it does not.
Right.
We have different sources of information that we rely on, and the status quo, those who peer review these issues agree these are the scholars that accept whatever's put forth to them because they all agree, but it's not necessarily factual.
Right. People get their charts read all the time because, I'm a Pisces.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And, when you get into religion, that's a whole nother thing, right?
It's all false information. It's all for the imagination. It has nothing to do with reality.
Right. So you going to keep writing?
I've got another one on the way.
Great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, and thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. We hope to see you back here every Saturday night at 8 o'clock, or listen to our podcast anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, just to name a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore, where independent new authors come first.